Hello and welcome to Vendor Trash. It's the title a reference to my opinions, to my art skills, or both. That's for you to decide. I think sometime in 2003, the original Warcraft, Orcs and Humans, as well as Warcraft 2, were both added to the BattleNet launcher, and I decided this year to go ahead and pick them up. They're both fairly cheap, I think about $6 each. And I know that there have been fan works that have basically redone these with modern technology and with more fleshed out storylines, but I wanted the official product and just, experience it as it was. And that was a mistake. Nah, I kid, but I did play through Warcraft 1 about a month ago, and I'd be lying if I said it wasn't rough. It very much feels like a game that was made in 1994, because it was. And from what I've heard, even Warcraft 2, which came out about a year later, was already a massive step up in quality, and I believe it. The graphics are about what you would expect from a game of that era, trying to depict dozens of units on a screen at once. And even RTS games were still kind of discovering themselves at this point in time. It's a pretty straightforward game all in all. I'll probably be comparing it to Warcraft 3 a lot, since that is the RTS I am most familiar with. The campaign consists of 24 missions, 12 from the human campaign and 12 from the orc campaign, but ultimately both of them are basically carbon copies of one another. Each one can basically split up into one initial building mission, 8 missions where the goal is just a slight variant of survive and wipe out the enemy base. One of those 8 happens to be against your own race instead of the opposing one. And then about 3 missions that are effectively dungeon crawlers. There isn't a lot of innovation here, probably because there wasn't a lot of technology to be innovative with. There aren't really any cinematics, just a few animated stills basically at the end of each campaign. And between each mission, you just get the same animated still of either 2 orcs or 2 humans sitting at a war planning meeting, as well as a very brief map render that doesn't look particularly great. The story is also pretty bare bones, would be expanded upon in the future years and novels and everything related to WoW. But at this point in time, it's pretty much orcs smash, humans smash back, and that's about it. From what I recall, there's only even 7 named characters in the whole game. Just running through them real quick, we have Anduin Lothar, the commander of the Stormwind human army. You have King Laenrin, who you hear about, and then just in the text scroll between 2 missions, you find out that he was assassinated by Garona. That brings us to Garona, who, other than that, shows up in one mission where you need to rescue her from Northshire Abbey as the orcs. You have Blackhand, the commander of the orcs, until you, the player character, I guess you're supposed to be Doomhammer in this case, manage to prove yourself more capable than him, and you seize control of the horde. There's also Medivh, who shows up in one mission where he's just described as a warlock, and you need to put him down, which, is an approximation of what they landed on for his lore. And then we have Griselda, who is the daughter of Blackhand. She runs off with an ogre named Turok into the Dead Mines, and this is considered an act of betrayal against Blackhand, so it's your mission to go in and kill them both. And that's it. As for the gameplay, there are a lot of quality of life choices that are present in Warcraft 3 that you will notice did not exist at this point in time. First and foremost, you can only select 4 units at a time. In Warcraft 3, that is 12 units, and it makes a big difference. I believe I read it somewhere that the developers thought selecting more than 4 units would make the game too easy, and I agree, but for different reasons. There's also no such thing as control groups. I know in Warcraft 3, you could save up to 12 units to a keybind. So you just like push 1, and then those same 12 units would be who you're controlling. You could push 2 and control another 12 that you had saved. That does not exist here. And lastly, when you want to select more than 1 unit, in Warcraft 3, you just, draw a vector over them. In Warcraft 1, you have to hold, I don't remember, it's probably control or something, some sort of modifier key, and then draw the vector, which is a completely pointless design decision because, if you do it without the modifier key, nothing happens. So why have the modifier key there, All 3 of these sort of combine to create an overarching problem, which is that it's just a real pain to have large armies in this game. There's no meat system or food system, I guess, that punishes you for having large armies, as far as I can tell. And I imagine the unit cap was probably 100 or something like that. But just the fact that it becomes such a hassle to move large armies around naturally discourages you from generating them, and that sort of creates an artificial difficulty. There were a ton of points in this game, almost any mission where you are allowed to freely generate units, where I just didn't want to because it was such a hassle to move them around. I could probably create a 20-25 unit army and have a much easier time with the actual combat, but I didn't want to do that because I hated having to move more than 12 units at a time. So I would usually just generate a small defense force to leave around my base, and then move 8 or 12 units in to slowly chip away at the enemy forces, which thankfully wasn't too difficult. I feel like they didn't really design the computers to generate new units in a lot of the missions, or at least not generate them very quickly. So with enough patience, you could pretty much clear any mission. But ultimately, I don't really think they intended for you to, clear these missions out with a tiny attack force. That's just how the game sort of pushed you out of a matter of annoyance. Another point of frustration was one ultimate spell that each race had access to. If you're going up against humans, their conjurers, I want to say, could learn the invisibility spell, which would let them completely stealth one of their units. So throughout a mission, you would just, without any warning whatsoever, have invisible knights or footmen popping up in your base, attacking your peons, and causing damage to your farms. And wasn't that difficult to deal with, but it was just incredibly tedious and frustrating, especially since your peons or your peasants, if there was any sort of attack on your base at all, would just completely shut down. You have to select all of them and send them back to work manually, and it's just very frustrating. On the flip side, if you were going up against orcs, I believe necrolytes had access to the Unholy Armor spell, which would sacrifice half of a unit's HP in exchange for making them unkillable until the spell wore off. This led to situations where they would send forces into your base or against your army, and even if you vastly outnumbered them, they would kill a few of your units just because they were invincible. I also found that towards the end of either campaign, the ideal strategy became simply to utilize your ultimate summon spells for each race. For humans, it was a water elemental. and for orcs it was a demon. Basically, what you would do is just train a bunch of the, I want to say, conjurers and necrolytes again, one of the casters. And ideally you wanted between like 8 and 12 of these. Then you could just use their ultimate summon spells to generate about 4 water elementals or demons at a time. Then you could send those in and wreck up your enemy's base. And once that was done, you could switch to the next 4, keep doing that, switch to the last 4, and by that time you usually will have regenerated enough mana on your first set to just keep going. And this was like by far the best strategy, just because you weren't actually risking any of your units that took time and resources to train. You just keep throwing away the summonables, and yeah, it was a pretty easy win once you figured that out. Full disclosure, despite saying that, I did make ample use of save states, just because of the aforementioned like invisibility and unholy armor stuff. It made it feel like you could very easily have your forces decimated, and frankly, my integrity was not enough to keep me from not restarting a like 30 to 60 minute mission because of stuff like that. I'm fairly confident I have beaten Warcraft 3 without save states. I don't care enough in this case. I'm sorry. Lastly, I feel like the two races were not properly balanced. There were trade-offs for everything, but I think humans clearly had an easier time of it. Off the top of my head, human archers had 1 more range than orc spearmen. The spearmen had 1 more damage, but in RTS games, range outpaces damage significantly. Like, it doesn't matter if the enemies can do more damage if you kill them before they get in range to hit you. Additionally, human priests could heal your own units, whereas orc necrolytes, again, I'm not sure, could raise dead, but being able to heal your own units was just far more valuable, because training units and replacing them is particularly punishing in this game, so being able to mitigate that in any way is incredibly valuable. And lastly, I just think the water elementals were slightly more useful than demons. I mean, if you're using that strat, it doesn't make much of a difference, but water elementals were ranged and demons were melee. So, as I said before, range is king, and it's just slightly smoother in that case. But yeah, it was an interesting look at the origins of Warcraft, where it all started. I would not recommend anyone actually play through this game. If you want to, I'm pretty sure those fan remakes of the campaign would probably be much more enjoyable. But I wanted to experience it, and now I can say I have. And eventually I'll get to Warcraft 2. And I'll probably replay Warcraft 3 for the 3rd or 4th time, because this really gave me that RTS itch. And despite all my criticism for the game, I do appreciate it for what it was. It was a much smaller team back then. It was 1994, and it led to much bigger and better things, so I'm glad it happened. Now, moving on to the artwork this week, I decided to go with one of the 7 major characters of Warcraft Orcs and Humans, Medivh. He actually only shows up for one mission where you go and kill him. He isn't mentioned at all before or after, so I just decided to go with him, since, like Gul'dan, he is one of the most significant characters in the Warcraft lore. At least he would be once they expanded upon it a bit. I set him in Karazhan, and instead of doing a nice epic pose, I just had him sitting on some of the ruined stairways, looking kind of despondent. I always sort of got the vibe that he was kind of a lonely guy. He definitely had friends, and it was those friends that wound up sort of being his saviors by putting him down once his corruption fully took hold. And he had his workers and Khadgar as his apprentice. But all in all, I feel he led sort of a lonely existence. You know, he was born with Sargeras possessing him, so It wasn't until after his death that he really got to fully be himself. He didn't really ever know his mother, Aegwynn, and yeah, he just was always the most powerful person around, and no one could really relate to that. And he always had this dark side of him that he was wrestling with, which, again, nobody else really could relate to. I know he found a certain kinship with Garona, who he found to be kind of similar, because she also had demonic forces sort of influencing themselves over her. In his case, it was Sargeras. In her case, it was Gul'dan, who was a servant of the Legion. And they were both sort of outcasts. In his case, you know, he was this very dangerous wizard. And in her case, she was a half-breed and not really respected by most of Orc culture. I know, at least in the comics, they made the two of them have a romantic relationship, which led to the creation of Medan, he who was retconned out of existence because he was such an awful character. I don't know if their romance is still considered canon or not. I know the Warcraft movie made it so that Medivh was Garona's father, which was a little weird. But anyway, you splice it, he just seems like a lonely guy. And I'm glad that in Warcraft 3, he was sort of brought back to be this prophet character who, even though he himself couldn't do much to affect the Legion invasion, he did guide the heroes of that game to protect the world. And then, as he said so gracefully at the end, took his place amongst the legends of the past. Yeah, only in death could Medivh truly be Medivh and nobody else. Granted, it's kind of ambiguous, like, was he still alive back then? Is it just, like, a vision? Is he still alive today? I mean, from what I read, his mother revived him, but it's kept very nebulous and ambiguous. And it's pretty much whatever Blizz needs it to be. Personally, I hope he stays gone. You know, I do enjoy the character, but not everybody needs to be brought back all the time. Just leave some things in the past, Blizzard. On that note, I think we will wrap things up here. So thank you for watching, and I will catch you next week. Bye-bye!